The shooting happened in a neighborhood off Beltway 8 in Northeast Harris County yesterday morning when police say the couple went to pick up a child, but it ended in gunfire.
Hey, what's good, Port Arthur?
In a Facebook post about voting, a bit of the lovable teddy bear personality of teacher Marlon Sanders shines through. The Port Arthur School District sharing that he was a beloved music teacher and football coach, but just after midnight Tuesday morning, Sanders was shot and killed here at Blue Timbers Court. Amber Howard saw the frantic moments.
I was just upstairs watching TV, and all I hear was a woman like screaming, saying, "Gary, give me my baby, Gary, give me my baby." And then, of course, I'm still hearing it, and that's when I heard like 2 gunshots. And right after that, that's when the woman was screaming, "You shot my husband, you shot my husband." I look out there, she doing CPR.
It's tragic, it is, because of the situation that happened, but we knew that gentleman there that lived there to have a lot of anger issues.
Marlon Sanders was the kind of teacher students remembered for the rest of their lives. In Port Arthur, Texas, if you walked the halls of Lucian Adams Elementary, you knew his voice before you knew his name. He taught music, he led the choir, he coached over at Memorial High School, and threw himself into football season like it was personal. People who worked with him kept reaching for the same description when they talked about him afterward: a big teddy bear, the hype guy, the one who made a room feel lighter the second he walked in. He had served the district for more than 7 years, and in that time he became something a school can't manufacture and can't replace: a person kids actually wanted to be around. That's the short version. This story was never really about a career. It was about a family and the impossible kindness one man showed inside it, a kindness that, in the end, is the reason we're talking about him at all. To understand the night everything came apart, you have to understand the arrangement that tied 3 adults together, and you have to set aside any urge to judge it quickly. Marlon was married. Like a lot of couples, he and his wife hit a stretch they couldn't fix in the moment, and they separated. Court records would later place that separation around 3 years before the events of this story. Time apart isn't unusual. People drift, they regroup, they figure out whether what they had is worth saving. During that window, while Marlon and his wife were living separate lives, she began a relationship with another man. His name was Gary Davis. And during that relationship, she and Davis had a child together, a baby girl. Here is where most stories would simply end one chapter and start another. This one didn't, because Marlon and his wife found their way back to each other. They reconciled after the baby was born. They chose to rebuild the marriage, and in doing so, they walked straight into a situation almost no couple ever has to navigate. They were now raising a household that included a baby fathered by another man. Think about how easily that could have turned bitter. Think about how many people would have drawn a hard line, demanded distance, treated that child as a wound to be hidden. Marlon did the opposite. He and his wife made a decision together, and it's a decision that tells you everything about who he was. They did not cut Gary Davis out of his daughter's life. They agreed to let him have a relationship with her. They allowed visitation. Marlon, a man raising a little girl who carried another man's blood, chose to share her because he believed she deserved to know her father. That is not an easy thing to do. It asks you to swallow your pride and your discomfort and your ego all at once for the sake of a child who never asked to be born into the middle of any of it. Most people couldn't manage it. Marlon did. And at the time, that generosity looked like the thing that would hold everything together. It would turn out to be the thing that cost him his life. For a while, the system worked. The wife would bring the baby to Davis. He'd keep her for a couple of days. Then she'd come back and pick the little girl up, and life would continue. Predictable, manageable. The kind of quiet routine you build precisely so that a child has stability, so the adult's history stays in the background where it belongs. But routines only stay calm as long as everyone inside them stays calm. And somewhere along the way, something in Gary Davis began to change. The people closest to the arrangement felt it before they could name it. the handoffs that used to be simple started carrying a charge. Conversations got shorter, colder, harder to read. The man who had once gone along with the plan didn't seem to be going along with anything anymore. What was driving it? Was it the sight of his daughter being raised in another man's home? Was it watching the woman he'd been with go back to her husband? Resentment has a way of compounding quietly, in the gaps between visits, in the things a person tells himself when no one's around to argue. Nobody on the outside had the full picture. They only knew the temperature was rising. It's worth pausing on what the visits actually represented for a man like Davis. Every couple of days, he'd get his daughter, and every couple of days, he'd have to give her back, watch her leave in someone else's car, returning to a home where another man tucked her in. For some people, that ache fades into acceptance. For others, it sharpens into something darker, a daily reminder of everything they feel was taken. There's no evidence anyone tried to provoke him. If anything, the opposite is true. He was being handed access most men in his position would never have been offered. But access wasn't the thing he wanted. And that gap between what he was given and what he believed he was owed is where this whole tragedy was quietly incubating, visit after visit, while everyone around him hoped the worst of it was behind them. There's a question that lingers over this entire stretch of the story, and it's one the people involved have probably asked themselves 1,000 times since. Did anyone see how far it could go? Tense text messages and chilly handoffs are, unfortunately, ordinary features of a hard co-parenting situation. They don't usually end where this one did. So the warning signs that look so obvious in hindsight didn't carry the same weight in the moment. That's the cruel arithmetic of cases like this. The signal and the noise look identical, right up until the second they don't. And then came the day that turned a slow shift into something that couldn't be walked back. A few days earlier, following the usual pattern, Marlon's wife had brought the baby to Davis for a scheduled visit. Nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary. But when it came time to pick the little girl up, Davis didn't behave like a man coordinating a handoff. He started texting. These weren't logistics. According to court records, he messaged his ex directly and told her he was on that type of time, and he warned her that he wasn't going to give the baby back. Sit with that for a second. A 9-month-old child, and the man who fathered her, sending threats through a phone screen that he intended to keep her. For any parent, that's a special kind of fear, because you can't measure it. You don't know if it's pressure or a promise. You don't know what's waiting on the other side of that door. You only know that your child is in there, and that staying home is not an option. Marlon could have stepped back from this one. He could have told his wife to call the police and let them handle the exchange. But the same instinct that made him a protector in a classroom didn't switch off at home. So they made a choice together. They'd both go. They got in the vehicle, and they drove out toward a residential street on the northeast edge of Harris County Blue Timbers Court, tucked off near Tidwell and C.E. King Parkway, on the outskirts of Houston. Picture that drive. You're in the car with your spouse. Your baby is in the hands of a man who just told you he won't hand her over. You're running every version of the next hour through your head. Will he answer the door? Will he argue? Will there be a scene, a standoff, a long, ugly negotiation on someone's lawn at midnight? You brace for friction. You brace for a bad night. You do not brace for the thing that's actually coming, because no reasonable person ever does. It was late when they arrived, just past midnight, the neighborhood already dark and still. Porch lights off, no movement on the street, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful so much as held. When they got there, they made a decision that, looking back, was both sensible and heartbreaking. Marlon would stay at the vehicle, his wife would walk up, collect the baby, and come right back. Quick and clean. No confrontation. Get the child, leave, go home. That was the entire plan. She walked up to the house. The person who came to the door wasn't Gary Davis. It was his mother. She brought the 9-month-old outside and handed her over, and for a moment, one fragile moment, it looked like this was going to be nothing but an awkward late-night pickup that everyone would forget by morning. The baby was in her mother's arms. All that was left was to turn around and walk to the car. Then a voice came from inside the house, Davis. And the thing he called out wasn't a question about his daughter. He didn't ask if she'd eaten, didn't ask about her car seat, didn't say goodnight to his own child. What he wanted to know was who his ex had brought with her. Who was out there? Nobody answered. His mother said nothing. Marlon's wife said nothing. She just turned and started walking back toward the vehicle, holding the baby close. And that silence, that refusal to feed him a name, is what lit the fuse. Because Davis didn't need anyone to answer. He already knew. He knew exactly who was sitting out there in the dark. The man his ex had gone back to. The man raising his daughter. In his mind, the man who had taken the life that was supposed to be his. What happened next took only seconds. Gary Davis came out of that house with a gun. He didn't stop on the porch. He didn't shout a warning or wave the weapon around to scare anyone off. He moved with a single purpose, straight off the steps and across the yard, toward the vehicle where Marlon was standing. Marlon hadn't approached the house. He hadn't said a word to Davis. He had done exactly what he and his wife agreed on, stayed back, stayed out of it, let her handle the exchange. He was a man waiting by a car so his family could go home. Davis closed the distance and fired twice. Marlon went down in the roadway, beside the vehicle that was meant to carry all of them back to safety. His wife was only feet away, the baby in her arms, close enough to witness every second of it. There had been no fight, no shouting match between two men, no physical struggle that spiraled. This wasn't an argument that went too far. It was decided before Davis ever stepped outside. And then he ran. He didn't check on the man he'd shot. He didn't call for help. He didn't even look at his own daughter. He got into a different vehicle and left the scene, leaving Marlon in the street and the mother of his child standing there in shock. The neighbors heard it before they understood it. One woman who lived nearby, Amber Howard, was upstairs with her TV on when the night cracked open. She heard a woman outside screaming for someone named Gary to give her the baby. Then 2 gunshots. Then a different scream, the unmistakable sound of a person realizing what just happened to the man they loved. When Howard looked outside, the wife was already on the ground beside Marlon, trying to keep him alive, doing chest compressions in the middle of a residential street while she waited for help that couldn't arrive fast enough.
I was just upstairs watching TV, and all I hear was a woman like screaming, saying, "Gary, give me my baby, Gary, give me my baby." And then, of course, I'm still hearing it, and that's when I heard like 2 gunshots. And right after that, that's when the woman was screaming, "You shot my husband, you shot my husband." I look out there, she doing CPR. Like firecrackers, but super, super loud. Like they sound like so close. Like it kind of had my ear ringing a bit. That's what it sounded like. It was just 2 shots.
And here is the detail that tells you the most about the kind of man Davis is not in the heat of those seconds, but in the cold minutes after. While Marlon lay in the road and his wife knelt over him, Davis started calling her, over and over. When she finally answered and handed the phone to a Harris County deputy at the scene, he hung up the instant he heard an officer's voice. Then he tried again from a different number, as if a new caller ID could somehow rewind the night. Those weren't the calls of a man drowning in panic and regret. They were the calls of a man trying to find out what his ex was telling the police, trying to manage the story before the story caught up to him. It was already too late for that. Paramedics rushed Marlon to a hospital. The wounds were beyond what anyone could repair, and despite everything the doctors tried, Marlon Sanders was pronounced dead. He was 36 years old. The baby and his wife were not physically hurt, but not physically hurt carries a quiet cruelty in a story like this, because the little girl who was handed across that threshold will one day have to learn that her biological father killed the man who was raising her. That's a weight no child should ever inherit.
You scared?
No.
Alright, don't be scared. I'm trying to see. You want them balls again? I don't know how they did that. Did he just roll it up into a ball? Is that what she did?
When investigators arrived, they didn't have to work hard to figure out what had happened. The scene practically narrated itself. Neighbors had come out after the shots and were pointing in the same direction. Davis's own mother had been standing right there, the same woman who'd handed the baby over moments earlier. And Marlon's wife was able to give detectives a complete account, the threatening texts, the demand from inside the house, every step of the timeline. That timeline mattered enormously because it dismantled the only defense Davis might have reached for. The text messages established that he was agitated and making threats hours before the couple ever pulled up. He hadn't reacted to something that happened at the door. He'd been moving toward this all night. The threats, the refusal to return the child, the question shouted from inside, the gun it read as a sequence, not a sudden snap. And the phone records from after the shooting added the final layer. The frantic calls, the immediate hang-up, the second a deputy spoke, the attempts from other numbers. Investigators were looking at a man who knew exactly what he'd done and was trying to get out ahead of it. Cases like this often come down to a contest between two stories, the prosecution's and the defense's. And what makes this one so lopsided is how little room the physical evidence leaves for a second story. Consider what detectives were able to lock down. The location of Marlon's body told them where he was standing. In the roadway, by his own vehicle, not on Davis's porch, not inside his home, not anywhere he could be cast as an intruder or an aggressor. The number of shots told them this wasn't a single panicked reflex. The direction Davis came from out of the house, toward the car, told them who closed the distance and who didn't. And the witnesses standing on that street weren't strangers piecing together a blur. Several knew exactly who they'd seen run out armed, including the one person who could never be accused of bias against him, his own mother, who had been holding the baby moments before. Then there's the digital trail, which in a modern case like this can be more damning than any eyewitness. Text messages don't get nervous on the stand. They don't misremember. The threats Davis sent before the shooting sat in a phone, time-stamped, waiting. The call logs from after the shooting did the same. Each record was another fixed point that a defense attorney would have to explain away, and there are only so many ways to explain a message threatening to keep a child, followed within hours by a man charging out of a house with a gun. Every recovered text, every logged call, every neighbor's statement narrowed the space he had to maneuver until there was almost none left. The Harris County Sheriff's Office put their full weight behind the case. Precinct 3 constable deputies were first on scene. Crime scene investigators and homicide detectives processed the roadway and led the investigation. The Violent Criminals Apprehension Team, the unit built to track down exactly this kind of suspect, went to work alongside K-9 units and air support. Davis hadn't gotten far, and in truth, he was never going to. When you fire a weapon in front of your own mother, on a street full of witnesses, with the victim's wife standing feet away, you don't disappear. You just delay the inevitable by a few hours. He was located and taken into custody without a struggle, no chase, no standoff, no last act of defiance. The fury that had carried him out of that house was gone, and what remained was a man being booked into the Harris County Jail and formally charged with murder. What comes next for Gary Davis is a process, not a single dramatic moment. A murder charge in Texas moves through grand jury review, pretrial hearings, and eventually, unless there's a plea, a trial where 12 jurors weigh exactly the kind of evidence detectives spent that night assembling. It can take many months, sometimes longer. And in the meantime, the question of whether he sits in a cell or walks free pending trial becomes its own battleground, which is why the bond fight matters as much as it does. For now, that fight is unresolved, and a man accused of one of the more clear-cut killings a county will see this year waits to learn the terms of his own confinement. There's a quieter legal aftermath too, the kind that rarely makes the news. Somewhere in all of this is a 9-month-old girl whose father is charged with killing the man helping raise her. The adults around her will eventually have to make decisions no one should have to make about custody, about contact, about what she's told and when. Those conversations won't happen in a courtroom with cameras. They'll happen in living rooms and lawyers' offices, slowly, over years. And they'll shape a childhood that began with a handoff that should have been ordinary. Prosecutors moved fast, and the facts gave them every reason to. An unarmed man shot beside his vehicle during a custody exchange in front of witnesses with threatening messages already sitting in evidence by a suspect who fled and then tried to work the phones. As of this telling, Davis's bond had not been set, and a motion had been filed asking a judge to deny him bond entirely to hold him with no path out before trial. There is no version of self-defense that survives contact with what the evidence shows. A man standing by a car, making no aggressive move, was shot twice by someone who ran at him from inside a house, carrying a loaded gun. That isn't a man protecting himself. That's a man who decided that if he couldn't have the life he wanted, he'd take it from the person who had it. Back in Port Arthur, the grief moved through the community in waves. The district learned the news and mobilized before the school day even started. Counselors and social workers from across Port Arthur ISD, along with the superintendent and senior staff, met students and teachers at the doors that morning. The principal at Lucian Adams Elementary, Dr. Shalunda Filer, spoke about Marlon the way you talk about someone you genuinely loved, recalling how his dedication was obvious from the first time she met him, how he had a way of caring that wasn't performed for anyone, that simply existed. Colleagues at Memorial described the same man on the field that students saw in the classroom, someone who made people feel seen. And in one small, almost unbearable moment of timing, the morning the school was grieving him, a long-stalled campus project finally came to life. A local volunteer group arrived with more than 20 raised garden beds, the revival of a beautification effort that had sat unfinished for years. They called it the Garden of Hope. For students sitting inside a building heavy with loss, those bright planters showing up that exact morning offered a flicker of light on one of the darkest days the campus had faced. Nobody planned the symbolism. It just happened that way. The Sanders family released a statement asking for privacy as they grieved, sharing the full weight of who they'd lost in a single line that they were mourning their husband, father, son, and brother, Marlon Jaron Sanders, Sr. They asked the public to keep them in their prayers and to let them grieve together. Around them, an entire community tried to hold them up, sharing memories, posting old videos of choir performances he'd directed, returning again and again to the same impossible question: how does a person this gentle end up taken in a way this senseless? The hardest part for the people in Port Arthur wasn't just that he was gone. It was the shape of how he was gone. This wasn't an accident, or an illness, or one of the random tragedies a community learns to absorb. A man known for diffusing tension, for being the steady presence in a room, was killed standing still and doing nothing killed, precisely because he'd extended a kindness most people wouldn't have. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with that, and it doesn't move through the stages neatly. Teachers who'd worked beside him for years had to walk into classrooms the next morning and find words for children who'd just lost the adult who made school feel safe. Some of them admitted they didn't have those words. They showed up anyway, because that's what he would have done. His funeral and the memorials that followed drew the people you'd expect and a great many you wouldn't. Former students now grown, parents whose kids he'd coached, musicians he'd performed alongside, colleagues from buildings across the district. The through line in everything said about him was consistency. He wasn't one person at school and another at home. The man who patiently worked through a little girl's hair on a quiet afternoon was the same man who stayed late for a student who needed it, the same man who agreed to share a child who wasn't his by blood. People kept circling that word genuine because in a world where a lot of kindness is performed, his clearly wasn't. That question doesn't have a clean answer, but the case forces you to look squarely at what was thrown away.
He actually cared. It was a genuine care that he had for people and children. He cared about if he met you, if you had any part dealings with him, he had a heart.
I hadn't seen many individuals come into Marlon's life or into his space with a negative or angry attitude or mentality. He's always been someone that I call a big teddy bear, someone you can lean on, a confidant.
Some of those who knew Sanders best spent the afternoon remembering him through song.
I sought the Lord, and he heard, and he answered.
His family released a statement on Facebook asking for privacy and for the community. Keep them in your prayers.
Gary Davis had a daughter. He had a relationship with her. He had visitation not because anyone owed it to him, but because the very people he came to resent chose to give it to him. Marlon and his wife didn't shut him out. They opened a door, and instead of walking through it as a father, instead of building something steady for his little girl, Davis fixated on what he couldn't control, the fact that the woman had gone home to her husband, and that another man was raising his child under another man's roof. He let that curdle until the night he answered it with a gun. Look at what the choice left behind. A wife without her husband, a school without one of its best, a community that won't hear his voice lead a choir again, and a baby girl who will grow up holding two truths that can never be reconciled, that the man who gave her life is the same man who took away the man raising her. There were warning signs, and that's the part that haunts the people who knew. Not dramatic ones, quiet ones, the handoffs that got tense, the conversations that got short. The man who used to cooperate slowly turning into someone the people around him didn't fully recognize. At the time, those shifts were easy to file under stress, under a complicated situation that was bound to have friction. It's only afterward that they line up into something that looks unmistakable. That's how it almost always works. The signs rarely announce themselves. They accumulate. If there's anything to carry out of this, it's this. If you're co-parenting through resentment, through a situation that feels impossible, the children are watching how you handle it. They absorb every choice. The way an adult metabolizes anger today becomes the blueprint a child carries tomorrow. Marlon Sanders understood that better than most. He lived it in his classroom, on his field, and in his own living room, where he chose patience over pride in the hardest possible circumstances. He didn't die because he did something wrong. He died because he did something right, and stood beside a man who couldn't accept that the right thing had been done without him. Rest easy, Marlon. You deserved far better than this. If this story moved you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps these cases reach more people who need to hear them. And before you go, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Drop your city or your country below. I read them, and I want to know how far this story is traveling. Thank you for watching.